The story of Lincoln High School spans back to almost 25 years following the Civil War. In 1889, what is now known as an office building in Old Gahanna served as the original high school until 1927. The senior class of 1927 was the first to graduate in the new building located on the corner of Hamilton and Havens Corner Road. Katie Weimer, one of the original graduates of the class of 1927, was the woman who came up with the blue and gold color scheme for Lincoln High School.
It was fun because we got to pick out the name for the high school. We voted on it. People would suggest colors and that sort of thing. And I was happy because I suggested blue and gold. And it turned out to be the one the students had
During the
picked.
summer of 1926, many hours were spent constructing what we now know as B Building. When originally built, no one had any idea that it would still continue as a high school. In the past, many faces have gone through the hallways of Lincoln High School. These students and staff have contributed in their own way and helped to build the rich traditions that we now have at the high school. Though the building may look very different than it did in 1927, the spirit of Gahanna Lincoln High School continues to be strong. Many past staff members and students reveal where some of these rich traditions began. An award-winning program still running strong is student-produced news show WGLH-TV. Mrs. Jody Geiser, one of the original creators of WGLH-TV.
I started calling the different TV stations, and I remember calling WTVN and the chief engineer, and I asked to speak to him, and they said, well, you know, who's calling? And I told him, and he got on the phone, and he wanted to know what I wanted, and I said, well, we're starting a TV program at Gahanna, and I wondered if there was any things in your barn over there that you don't need, because I'd like to come over. And so he invited me over, and we went out to the barn, and I picked out some things that I thought we could use, and that sort of started a relationship with Channel 10, and he started coming over and giving little lectures, and he started giving us all kinds of equipment. He was wonderful. The shows will always come off, and they always were good. The lead-ins, if you watch some of the old shows, they probably don't differ a whole lot from what you're doing now. We made we didn't have teleprompters or anything, but the lead-ins all had to be memorized. We couldn't have any reading, no scripts on the table, nothing.
From the beginning has been the track and field program. This year, Coach Ed Rary marked his 50th year as coach and was inducted into the Lincoln High School Athletic Hall of Fame. Over the years, he has seen many athletes, including guest speaker Olympian Jesse Owens in 1953.
All you have to do is look around the wall here, and you know, every time I come in, they meet me, and naturally I renew old friendships on a personal basis, and even by looking in the wall and people call my attention to a particular year, you go back and you go through them, so it's fresh in your mind. And you know, how do I feel in regard to that? You know, it's a very warm experience to feel and know that the kids feel that positive in regard to the program, that they can come back and share and walk the track and renew old memories and sit down and talk with their former coach.
The mayor of the city of Gahanna, Ohio, proclaimed Saturday, May 4th, 2002, as Ed Rary Day.
Larry Schwati has been with me for, he was one of my former athletes here at Gahanna Lincoln, graduating back in the late 60s, and then he came back and came on board and has been an assistant coach and followed me in the cross-country program, and I gave up cross-country in '87. Larry was my assistant, stepped right in, has done a great job.
Principal of Lincoln Elementary.
Not only most memorable, but probably one of the most exciting things that I've ever done. Really I say that, but it's the only thing that I really have been involved in professionally as a elementary principal and track and field coach. Yeah, it's very, very memorable, and it continues to be.
The Lincoln Lions' most popular sport is and has always been the game of football. Football at Lincoln began at the old schoolhouse in Old Gahanna in the early 1900s. Football has progressed throughout the 1920s, 30s, 40s to present, having famous coaches such as Coach Rosenthal, Flager, Billman, Koppel, Massaros, and currently Lanza. Prior to 1968, when the new football stadium was built, the old stadium was located in front of the school where Hamilton Road is. Veteran coach Phil Koppel reflects on his time as head of Gahanna Lincoln football program.
I had a very good staff. As a matter of fact, most of the guys we were together for the entire 10 years. I'll probably leave somebody off, but Hank Langhaus and John Dean and Gary McKillop and Steve Morrison, Colin Massaros, we were together the entire time. And I think we really had a cohesiveness and a closeness that you know, you could say what was on your mind, and it was almost like talking to your brother. You know, it was over and done with. If you're upset, you moved on. But they were just a bunch of great guys to work with. During the 10 years that I coached, we won 5 OCC championships, and twice we had teams that were voted #1 in the Spats poll, Central District #1. And also twice we went to the state playoffs and finished in we were defeated in the regional final one year, then also we got to the Final Four.
The drama department has also evolved in many ways over the past 75 years. For the first 50 years, all plays and musicals were performed in the old B Building Auditorium, which is now the gym. Mrs. Jody Geiser.
For musicals, it wasn't so bad. You could close the grand curtain and be out in front, and you could still get some kind of a good sound. But on plays, it was terrible. I mean, those kids had to just scream, and when you're in a play and you have to scream your lines, especially if it's an aside, you know, it was pretty bad.
In 1981, a new auditorium was constructed. Gahanna resident and stagehand of the Ohio Theater, Mr. Harold Souter, gave input into the design.
The new auditorium was wonderful. It was really wonderful. We thought we'd died and gone to heaven when we got the new auditorium.
Mrs. Jody Geiser and Mrs. Petey Dodrell, along with band director Mr. Robert Kessler, both had the opportunity to give input into the design.
They would call us in, Mrs. Dodrell and myself and the band director and the orchestra, and they would call us in and they would lay out the blueprints and they'd say, this is what we have in mind. Do you see a problem? And so we all had a little bit of impact on what was going to be in the new theater. The sound booth and the lights and all those kinds of things that I think made it a success. Which, you know, some people, if you gave you the idea, say, okay, here's the money, go design a theater, you wouldn't know where to start. And that was what they needed to know. They needed to know what they had to do.
Mr. Maurice Jones, Superintendent of the Gahanna Jefferson School District, 1972 to 1981.
I'm always proud, always feel good about coming into the auditorium because it's, I don't think there's a bad seat there, and the community seems to be really enjoying it and making the most of it. That was a concern I had early on, but I appreciate the fact that it's now being utilized and serving the community. For which purpose it was, started. That was what we had in mind, that it would be something that would pull the community together, and I think it's done that. I feel good about it.
The new auditorium benefited the drama department in many ways. Mrs. Petey Dodrell, theater director, 1970 to 1995.
My goal was to set up like a 3-year program. You had to take speech first, and then the other 3, of course, were electives. And I did. I ended up with that 3-year program, and by the time I'd had the kids in basically the sophomore and the junior level courses, I wanted to give a special, just one section of a special class for those people that were really interested in theater and really wanted to, pursue many aspects of it. So I developed Performance Studio, which was strictly perform. We basically performed most of the year.
Mrs. Mildred Powell, chemistry teacher 1962 to 1984, who also silkscreened the play and musical posters.
I originally silkscreened all of them. I printed them myself. And I'd take part of the family out to school. We'd do it at night. And then after so many years, I think we did about 20 years where I printed them. And then the last 10 years, I just drew them, and like Kinko's had them copied and so forth. It was a lot easier, but I sort of enjoyed the old silk screening. It was a lot of fun.
The Speech and Debate program, still strong today, began with only a few interested students in the late 1960s. Mrs. Jody Geiser, Speech and Debate Advisor.
When I came here, there was a speech teacher, and he had, I think maybe they had gone to 3 tournaments in the Ohio High School Speech League. Not debate at all. They just had like dramatic interp and oral interp. There were maybe 3 or 4 students that were interested, and so out of my speech class I started talking to them, would you be interested in taking this class, and so on and so forth, and enlisted enough people that I was able to come up with a team the first year. So in 1968 I think was our first debate team. The first year we hosted tournaments right here at Gahanna with hundreds of students from all over the state would come, and we utilized every room in all 3 schools, the little school, the middle school, and this school. It was all one campus, and it was exciting.
According to many, school in the 1950s at Lincoln High School was much different than it is today. 2 alumni, Miss Aloha Ba and Miss Nancy Blake, give us insight into school in the 1950s.
Not only was the high school elated about our school, but the community as a whole. And whenever anything great happened, the community, faculty, and students were all together. We had sock hops on Friday night after all the ball games. It didn't matter if it was football or basketball. Of course, they were the 2 major sports at that time. And you'd just bring in records. And we'd have pop and potato chips maybe, but that's what we'd do. And the faculty was there, some parents came, and we were just like one big happy family, if you wanted to call it that.
We only had 47 in our class, so we were pretty active. I was a cheerleader. I also played in the band. I was on National Honor Society and white teens, and just about the plays and about anything else you could have going on at the school. We were all very active.
The physical education classes were once separated by gender. Mrs. Carolyn Howard, physical education teacher, 1962 to 1992, discusses the segregation and problems that came with it.
I really knew I had come to a farm community. I had a kid ask me one day during class if she could go outside and water her horse. I thought she was putting me on, and so I said, sure, go ahead. So I followed her out. Sure enough, she had a horse tied up to the tree, and she'd ridden it to school. The boys and girls were not allowed to take physical education together. The girls took it on Monday and Wednesday, and the boys had Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, which obviously didn't sit well with me since they had it 3 days a week and we only had it 2, because when the kids went home on Thursday, then I didn't see them again until the following Tuesday, which made any kind of continuity in our program practically non-existent. So we worked out a deal where the boys had it Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday, and we had it Tuesday, Thursday, every other Friday.
The vocal music program has always thrived at Lincoln High School, taking trips across the state to compete in various competitions. Also, the chorale was formed at Lincoln High School in the late 1970s. Former choir director, Mr. John Stewart, 1981 to 2002.
My first impression was the place was closed. It was July 24th when I interviewed here in 1981, and the only students that I found in the building were the workers, the people that the school had hired to help with custodial duties in the summertime. And everybody I saw and heard were very respectful. I heard a lot of yes sirs, no sirs, and I thought that was, it sounded from the portion of the student body that I saw at that time that it looked like it'd be a really good place to teach. The costumes have gotten more showy, I guess. The music has changed somewhat, but the overall attitude, corral didn't compete in those days. They simply did their shows around town, and then for concerts, they didn't do any kind of competition. And in 1987, we took our first trip to a little town called Piqua, and we got pounded real bad because we were doing things the way competition show choirs do them. And we have sort of progressed ever since then, adding a little bit here, a little bit there. We've even added a costume change this year, and that was unheard of until this year.
Mr. Stewart's kids would always hear him express his favorite quote any time that his help was asked for.
That God helps those who help themselves, I think it's Ben Franklin. My grandmother used to say it to me. A lot of the things that I share with the kids, Granny said to us when I was a kid. Granny was a wise old lady, and whenever I would come in and whine for help, for doing to do some menial thing that I really could have done on my own, Granny would just look down at me and say, God helps those who help themselves. You go try it, and then I'll come help you.
One individual who certainly came up the ranks at Lincoln High School was teacher, coach, assistant principal, and superintendent Mr. Jack Schmidt, 1958 to 1996.
Well, in 1958, I was studying for my master's degree at Ohio State University, and I was over every day up by the men's gym, and because I had a good relationship with those professors when I was in undergraduate school, and so they told me that there was a vacancy out here for a basketball coach, and it was important that the person be able to teach an academic subject, and I was a math major, and so they thought it was a good job, so I come out and applied. Well, I taught math and coached basketball up through 1966, and in the spring of 1966, the high school principal at that time, Mr. Ben Webb, came to me and asked me if I'd be the assistant principal, because Pete McKillop was the assistant principal at the time, but he was going over to Stigler Road Junior High. That building was going to open in the fall of '66, and Pete was going to go over there as the principal of the junior high. So they asked me to be the assistant principal, and my first reaction was no. I didn't want to give up coaching basketball, but after talking about it a number of weeks, I eventually decided to accept the job as assistant principal. I had that job for 4 years, and the principal at that time resigned, and the superintendent came and asked me if I would like to be the principal, and I had that job for 12 years. And then after that, there was a vacancy. Again, Pete McKillop had moved from the principal's job at Middle School West to assistant superintendent in charge of business, and Pete retired, and so I applied for his job in 1982, became the assistant superintendent in charge of business, and I held that until '94 when the board asked me to take over the superintendency, and until I retired in '96. The biggest thing I wanted out of kids was honesty. You know, kids would do something, and I'd, as assistant principal, you'd call them in. All I wanted was a kid to be honest, because I believe that if you're an honest individual, we all do dumb things and we all do things we shouldn't do, but if you're basically honest, you'll eventually turn into a quality citizen.
The English department at Lincoln High School has also seen its share of changes. English teacher Mrs. Lucy Coney, 1970 to 1994.
It's the first time I had taught in a public high school. And then the next year there was a full-time position, and they asked me if I would be interested, and my husband and I argued over it because he didn't want me to take it, and I decided that I wanted to try it. So I gritted my teeth and said yes, and I taught. It was good, but you know, I just didn't know that much about a high school, and I thought that after all, I'd prepared myself to teach, and that and I was always reared or raised by my parents to be ready to take care of yourself if anything ever happened to you. So I decided this would be a good way to find out if I could take care of myself. If in American literature, when I taught the inscription by the rude bridge that spanned the Concord River, whatever, that is a song, and so I sang it instead of reading it. And when I taught Brave New World in 1984, I was able to find the tune to a lot of those, and so I sang it to my classes. I thought we should.
8 years after retiring, Mrs. Coney still remains a sub at Lincoln High School.
I like to learn, and I like for everybody else to know as much as I do, and I want to know as much as everybody else does. And so, and when I come to sub, I learn something just about every day. And so that's enjoyable to me. And I also like to share my, because I travel frequently, and I like to share my travels if it has anything to do with what I'm teaching. And I also like to share if I've learned something new.
English teacher and first female assistant principal, Mrs. Patricia Bierstedt, 1957 to 1986.
I got my master's degree in supervision and curriculum, and I got that in '67. There weren't any women administrators at that time, and they weren't open to having women administrators yet. And so it wasn't until 1982 that a job opening was available. And I just decided it might be a nice broadening.
For many years, being alone all day in C Building came with its advantages. Although C Building is not there anymore, it is still cherished by many. Former government teacher, Mr. Robert Powell, 1963 to 1984.
Well, when I first went there, and Costecca was teaching government all year long, state and local was only the last 3 weeks of the whole year. And I started it, and I broke up. We had federal government one semester and state and local the other. A lot has changed. We used to just teach 1 year of history and 1 year of government. And then I broke it up so that we had the state and local government is 1 year and federal government is 1 year, or half a year each, and so on like that. And then manifest destiny, that came along later on. That's when Koppel was there as the teacher, you know, Phil Koppel. And he was the one, he and Denny Hedges together, I think they created the Manifest Destiny. And that was fine, that was a good thing. But I stayed in government all the time, you know. And a lot of the people that were in my classes in there become doctors and lawyers and so on like that.
C Building was demolished in the fall of 2000 to make way for a new building. To Mr. Powell, C Building was not only a great place to teach, but a place where he holds many memories.
Well, I was very sad when they knocked it down. I liked that building for a long time, and we had a good parking lot and everything like that, and there was nothing wrong with the C Building. We spent a lot of good times there.
When C Building was destroyed in 2000, Mr. Powell managed to save one brick from his home of more than 20 years. Another history teacher of C Building, Mr. John Howard, shares his experiences of being late on his third day of school.
My first week on the job, I was living in an apartment on the west side of Columbus. It was actually a borrowed apartment. I was more or less between places to stay until I got settled. And I woke up at noon on my third day. The sun woke me up coming through the window. And I jumped out of bed, I ran to the phone, hit my toe on the bedstead, broke a toe in fact, called over here and told him I'd be in as quick as I could. I was sure I was going to be fired. I called my old landlady who drove about 2 miles an hour. Finally I said, "Nell, let me drive the car." We drove over here as quick as we could. I went into Mr. Webb's office, and I'll never forget this because I fully expected to be fired. And I apologized and said, "I don't blame you if you fire me." He said, "Well, we've already talked about that, and we're going to dock you a half a day's pay." From that point, and I was grateful for that. Not that a half a day's pay was a lot of money, but it was a lot, at that time it was a lot of money to me. But that was the way I started here. And the rest of the year was kind of uphill after that, fortunately.
In 1985, Mr. Howard gave up teaching to be a full-time assistant principal.
I taught until 1985, and then in 1985 I was a vice principal when Dale Ford became principal. And frankly, there were two reasons why I wanted to do that. One, I just wanted a change of pace. I liked the kids. I enjoyed the teaching aspect when you had the kids in front of you, but I just wanted to be I thought this would be a real change of pace, and it was.
During his time as teacher and assistant principal, Mr. Howard always appreciated his kids, noting that today, with a bigger school, this is much more difficult.
When I came here, we had 950 kids in the building, and you had a chance to find out a little bit about the kids. Not that you had to be nosy, but you knew if a kid was having a good day or a bad day, and you could give them a little support when they needed it. Today, you're lucky if you have time to have a conversation with many kids at all.
With the addition of the new science labs in 1995, the science department has also seen many changes. Mrs. Mildred Powell, chemistry teacher.
I started, it was an old school, and then
B building. Yeah.
that was in B building, and then that next year the high school was built, and they asked me if I wanted to go over and teach chemistry, and I did. So I just loved it. I really did. It was a lot of work. I studied like every night for a year, but I don't know, it was a unique place, and the community was great. They supported the schools.
For many years, all our sports were overseen by our first athletic director, Mr. Byron Prushing. Mr. Prushing's friend and colleague, former band director, Mr. Robert Kessler.
Barney Prushing was probably my best friend. I first met Barney when I first came here in the summer of '55. Barney was the athletic director and baseball coach in that time. And I met him at the first teacher meeting, and before school started. We had lunch together that day, and we were lifelong friends ever after that.
The Athletic Hall of Fame began in 1983 in honor of Mr. Prushing, who was pleased with sports at our school.
I was still coaching football as a reserve football coach at that time. And as we grew, the job became bigger and bigger. And I ended up taking that whole thing when I was still in the other building and got out of coaching altogether, and handled all the officials, handled basically the scheduling. Of course, that was all worked through with the coaches, supervised the coaches to a degree. We had a staff of coaches that were teachers within the building. And the advantage I saw to that, and the coaches saw, was that they saw their student athletes in the school building all day long, saw their behavior in the hallways. Teachers could contact them very easily. I got a problem with John Doe, you know, would you help take care of it? And all of this would take place. And that was a real plus, I felt. We had an excellent girls program that was directed by Carolyn Howard. The girls played other schools. They had a meal after the game. The home school provided that meal. They sat down, they communicated with one another. There wasn't any hard feelings. It was a good ball game or whatever. But then, of course, the leagues started to develop, and girls athletics came into being, basketball being the first one, and it slowly snowballed.
We used to have play days with other schools like Reynoldsburg and New Albany and Westerville, and basically what we would do is just set aside a day on the weekend, always on Saturday obviously, and we'd go over there and meet the other schools and play basketball all day long, and then one weekend we'd play softball all day long, and then one weekend we'd have a track meet, and basically that's how we got started. And the girls had to wear, it was absolutely the worst outfit I've ever seen in my life, but it was and they had been purchased the year before I came, so the kids had to wear them. But they were a one-piece blue outfit with bloomers sewed into the legs with elastic around the bloomer part, so when they did any sort of flips or anything like that in gymnastics, they were covered, you know, their modesty and everything was covered.
The band at Lincoln High School has been a very popular institution for a minimum of 75 years, traveling to various shows and performances around the state. Alumnus of the band, Mrs. Elsabeth Fridley.
We always marched in every parade that they had. We'd go downtown and march in the Christmas parade, and if the football team would win on Friday night, the band would lead the kids through the streets of Gahanna. We'd snake dance with the band playing through the streets of Gahanna and end up back at the high school. We had great times in that in the band, and everybody knew everyone, and I realize it's grown now to the point where it's very hard to know everyone.
Over the years, the band at Lincoln High School has seen many different directors. The longest director at Lincoln High School was Mr. Robert Kessler, who directed from 1955 to 1985.
I met the faculty first, and I was impressed with the people I was going to be working with. There were people like Mr. Preshing and Miss Bierstead and a guy named Dick Flager, who was the football coach at the time, and I was impressed by the general staff that was here, and I liked the people of the town, and I had heard good things about the school, and so my first impression was that of teaching personnel I was going to work with, and I was very enthusiastic about what kind of people they were and what they were trying to do with the youth of this community.
Over his 30-year tenure, Mr. Kessler took the band from local concerts to 1 year at the Browns-Bengals game as well as the Orange Bowl.
We played at State Convention of Ohio Music Education Association. We took the band to Detroit one time and played for a big convocation up there. We played in the Orange Bowl in 1968, I believe. It was either 68 or 69. The band was in the Orange Bowl. We had a lot of highlights, and every time I was with my kids, that was a highlight. I had a lot of highlights, and I just wouldn't want to put my finger on any one, but we had a lot of terrific times, and some of the high times were really Friday nights at Gahanna Lincoln footballs games, and those were the days when Gahanna Lincoln was a state powerhouse in football, and playing in the state finals in the Akron Rubber Bowl, and we also played for the Browns-Bengals game at Ohio Stadium 1 year before 80-some thousand people.
Mr. Kessler shares his 25th anniversary surprise in 1980.
We always marched down the field a la Ohio State style and stood in front of the flag, did the national anthem, and then left the field. Well, after the national anthem, I blew the whistle for the band to go off the field. And they didn't. They marched back up the field. And they had been meeting together for several weeks with Mr. Singer and Mr. Lutz, the two assistant directors, and preparing a surprise pregame show for me that was a copy of the very first show that I had done here when I came here. When the kids started marching the wrong direction, I started to run out on the field because no, don't do that. And my assistant grabbed me and they said, "Don't get excited. This is a surprise, so just take it in stride." 99 and 44% of the kids that I dealt with, I looked at them as my kids. Almost as if they were my own children. And I know that sounds trite and it sounds old-fashioned, but when you're around young people all day, every day, 5-6 days a week, for years, you get so that you almost feel like your family. And there were times when kids called me Pops because we got along so well.
During the late 1950s and early 1960s, the high school was under the legendary principal, Mr. Bailey Bush, who strived for school academics, Mr. Jack Schmidt.
I think that J. Bailey Bush deserves as much credit, if not more, than any other individual for bringing Gahanna an academic standing. He was very academically oriented, and not to say that the school didn't have good academics before the mid-50s, but athletics and music was a major portion of the school in the 50s. And J. Bailey Bush tried to keep the athletic program going and the music program, but I think he really worked hard to bring the academics to the same level. And he was very instrumental in bringing good teachers into the system who not only were interested in the sports and the music, but also were very much interested in producing good students. Mr. Bush was conducting a teachers meeting, and we were trying to find a solution to discipline as it was, and teachers kept making recommendations, and Mr. Bush said, well, that's against board policy and so forth. And finally a first-year teacher asked just what is board policy, and I said I volunteered to answer that, and Mr. Bush said, well, Jack, go ahead. And so I said, board policy is something administrators use when it's convenient and overlooks when it gets in the way. And of course, with that, Mr. Bush exploded, said that's the end of the teachers meeting, and walked out. And the next morning I had a little slip in my mailbox, please see me. And my humor of 24 hours before that wasn't very humorous. when Mr. Bush got done with me, he didn't really appreciate my sense of humor.
Constructed in 1927, B Building was in horrible condition by the early 1980s and was almost knocked down. In 1987, the school board decided to renovate B Building. Principal Mr. Jack Schmidt.
Prior to the renovation in 1987, when I came in 1958, of course the gym was about half the size that it is now, and the rest of the gym and the weight rooms and all that was a theater type setting. It was slanted floor going up and seated about 900 for basketball games and or school plays and musicals. Other than that, there was just regular classrooms. Classrooms were small, 650 square feet, and so it was difficult when you had a full classroom of students to go from the front of the room to the back room to work with a student, because it was quite crowded at 600 square feet, whereas the current classrooms are 750 in this high school building, and so the newer buildings are much easier for the teachers to get around and help with students, so it was a challenge.
The old band room was a dungeon. As a matter of fact, the kids in the band called it the dungeon because it was in the old what's now Building B. It was in the old building underneath the stage, downstairs. And the kids always said they were coming down to the dungeon. There were no windows in that room. We couldn't see outside. But boy, we sure had the place to ourselves. And the band rehearsed there, and we kept growing we started out, when I got here, we had about 40 kids. And by the time we finally got out of that and into the new building that we're in now, I had about an 85-piece band in a band room that was built for about 42 kids, and it was the dungeon, and that's the best I can say about it. It was a bad place.
When I started to teach there were wings added, and we had 7th grade in that building. In fact, Mr. Rary taught 7th grade in that building at one time, and we moved the home economic department into an area of their own. It used to be down on the first floor where our kitchen for meals was.
In 1987, the Board of Education, there was a debate about whether or not the old high school ought to be torn down or whether or not it ought to be renovated and kept. And the board decided they were going to renovate it. And so in 1987, that building was completely renovated. All new sewer lines, all new water lines, domestic water, heating water, all new electrical systems were put in. The building was not air conditioned, but an air conditioning system was put in. And as I said earlier, the gymnasium was about 80 by 50, and then there was theater type seating sloped up, and then there was a big slope of seats in the back. And all that was torn out, and the gym was extended to about twice the original size.
Located deep underground, the basement of B Building has been surrounded by many myths as well as rumors. Campus Security, Mr. Chris Clark.
This area used to be storage when in the original B building, the original high school built in 1926. We used to store theater props down here. This was originally, the theater was above us, where we now have a gym and a weight room, and they had basketball games on the stage of the auditorium. You could actually walk up the old auditorium where the weight room is now to get to the second floor. At that time, theater productions, of course, were in that auditorium, and the theater department had rain down here. If you look on the walls, there's a lot of graffiti dating back all the way to the 1960s, and you'll see some things like there's Camelot on the wall over there, there's Life with Father around the corner. All the different casts and crew for the different plays and productions used to put their names on the walls down here. A lot of history, a lot of tradition. Finally, when the school added a new auditorium in 1981-82, that tradition kind of faded because we, of course, started productions over in the new auditorium that we still have. One of the things that upperclassmen used to do when I was a student here is they would tell freshmen that this tunnel connected to A building. It does not connect to A building. So we, well, some students used to sell tunnel passes to the freshmen. Not a very honest thing to do, especially when the tunnel actually goes under B building away from A building. But the story was that in bad weather you could use your tunnel pass and not go outside in order to avoid getting in the rain or the cold. Of course, these were sold at the beginning of the year, and by the time the winter set in or the bad weather set in and the students tried to use them, it was too late to figure out who had sold them and where the money had gone. So if we go through this door over here, now things are going to get loud, so I'll explain before we go in. There's a little corner with a chair in it, and I'm making this up, but I always tell the kids when I bring them down here that this is where we used to serve detentions when I went to school here. So follow me. If I can get this door open from the freshman, I used to have to sit down here for hours at a time. It was a terrible fate if you ever made a teacher mad at you.
Celebrating its 25th anniversary, Varsity Varieties has been one of the main theater attractions. Co-founder, Mrs. P.D. Dodrell.
I can't believe that Varsity Varieties is going to be 25 years old this spring. I remember the first one. The idea actually came from Earl Garnes, who was new on the faculty, and they had done something like this at Massillon, you know, big football school, and there the athletic department did it. And so Earl went to the athletic department and asked them if they'd like to do it as a fundraiser, and they weren't interested. So he came to me, he was a fellow speech teacher, and he said, Petey, you want to do a Varsity Varieties? And I said, sure, why not?
It wasn't called Varsity Varieties, it was called an amateur show. And I think Neil Billman, he was a football coach, and he was one of the judges, and I don't know, a couple other people, and we kind of put it together, but it was like students from all the schools in Gahanna. We had middle school and high school and even some elementary kids that participated in it, and that kind of was the kickoff for the Varsity Variety Show. And then we decided, yes, we were going to continue it, but it was going to be a different kind of format.
The day before the show, I checked the box office, and it was terrible. We had more people on stage than we would have had in the audience, and this is in big old Building B. So I toured the principal's office and asked him if I could we have an assembly, just 15 minutes at the end of the day. And he said, okay. So we pulled what we thought were 3 of our best acts. We had a soloist, and we had a group of, I believe, mostly basketball players who had concocted a dance, and they did it in drag, and actually it was pretty good.
I think that it gives the students the opportunity to really show how great they are, and you know, they really are great. When you see these kids get up and perform, and then you go to professional shows and you see people perform, and I had an opportunity. I just came back from a cruise to the British Isles, and on the ship they have entertainment all the time, and on their shows there were people that weren't maybe parallel with the people that we had in Varsity Varieties. I mean, dancers, singers, whatever. So they're wonderful. The kids are wonderful.
it was nice just teaching those kids, you know. I really enjoyed it. It was a good experience, and I enjoyed Gehenna very, very much.
I'm glad that I was a part of it, and I'm glad that it has reached the point of development that it has reached. And I just think girls athletics is a great program, not just the basketball team, but our track team, volleyball team.
Always enjoyed my stay here. Teacher, coach, administrator. I can truthfully say all 38 years were enjoyable. I enjoyed, in retrospect, the classroom time and the coaching time the most, because in those kind of jobs you have day-to-day contact with kids, and when you do something for them, you get that satisfaction because you can see an immediate response.
It's wonderful. And the fact that it's improved is even more wonderful. To see the things that you people have achieved is just unbelievably remarkable.
And I've often said that probably my greatest tenure I had as superintendent was right here in Gehenna.
Very glad that it's there. Hope it always is there, and have a granddaughter 3 years old coming up, and I hope it's still there when she graduates.
I enjoy it. And I'm very proud of Gehenna Lincoln, and your physical facilities are just fantastic.
The time I spent at Gehenna Lincoln High School was some of the most rewarding time that I've ever spent.
The spirit of this high school is rooted in the academic excellence and quality programs established over the past 75 years. While these faces are of Lincoln High School's past, their work is a living legacy that will live on in the future. And with the support of the community, students and staff, the next 75 years will carry on this great tradition.